Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Random Fit. I am Wendy Batts, here with my friend and co-host, as always, Ken Miller. How are you?
Great, Wendy. How you doing?
I am so good. Today's topic, I think, is one that we have discussed in the past, but I think we're going to go a little bit more into the granular parts of kind of the lowdown of the low back. Because as you know, over 80% of Americans either have experienced it or will experience low back discomfort sometime in their life. And it's, looking on the fitness side of it, Ken, there are certain exercises and things that people are neglecting that are actually causing more harm to the lower back than good.
And the funny, I say this every time, right? The funny thing, or the ironic thing, is that when it comes to the low back, talking to clients, I'll get that comment, Wendy, and I know you get this too, is that, well, I'm doing this exercise, or I saw this thing on social media that this should help my low back. And the irony that I'm bringing up here is the fact that you'll see these posts that say, do this one exercise and feel the pain melt away, right? You do this one exercise or even two exercises, this is going to help alleviate that low back stress. And nothing frustrates me more than, I'd say frustrating, but I feel for my clients that they think they're doing something that's good for their back, but it either gets worse or there's no resolution. So they're in the same position, 2-3 weeks after they start something than when they first started the pain and tried to find solutions. So what we're going to bring up today, and I'm glad we're doing this because there's a lot of great intentions out there, I want to believe. And when people are doing something, they'll say, I'm doing this because I heard it does that. But a lot of times it's not the case, or not the case at all, or it's only a part of the picture. And I want to explore that today because a lot of people, they want to feel better. Like you said, Wendy, 85% of the population has had or is currently experiencing some kind of low back issue, or there's 23% of the population out there that actually chronically feels low back issues. So I want to not say set the story straight, but shed some light on what it might take extra consideration for to address low back issues.
Yeah. And unfortunately, social media, and if people still read magazines or people look in books or they're following somebody, they want to look a certain way. And that's one of the reasons why they may be interested in that person or what they have to say. And one thing to keep in mind is every individual body is different. We know that. We talk about that. If we didn't and everybody was the same, I wouldn't have a job. Ken, you wouldn't have a job. And we would be trying to figure out what we were going to do with our life. And so just because someone else is doing something doesn't mean that it's necessarily, like you said, the right solution for what we want, even though we may want to look like that individual. And that's the key thing. Oh, if you do this exercise, you too can have 6-pack abs in 2 weeks or less before you hit the beach in your bikini. Do this, follow along with me. And it, like I said, is working for that one individual, but they may have better core strength and stability and certain things if they're trying to do something for 6-pack abs. First of all, 6-pack abs, if you really want them, yes, you're going to have to train the body in all planes of motion, doing all different types of exercise. You can't spot reduce. We do know that, but crunches are not always the solution. So if you're doing sit-ups and crunches and you don't have good core stability, then doing 500 crunches or sit-ups a day, and you too can look like this, is going to cause more harm to your lower back than good. And so there's something called your psoas muscle. It's a hip flexor, but it runs basically from the hips and attaches to every single one of your lumbar spine. And so if you go into spinal flexion, meaning you're making a C with your body and you're crunching up and crunching up and crunching up, and this muscle is also already overactive, when you stand up, because of the where it is on the lumbar spine and it gets shortened, it will cause even more compression of those discs from vertebrae to vertebrae. And so doing a bunch of crunches, doing a bunch of sit-ups, it's not bad for you. But if you don't have good core stabilization, meaning that protection of those little muscles that protect the muscles or the discs in between those vertebrae, then you're going to be causing more compression, and you're still not going to have the six-pack abs. And now your lower back hurts, because then you get depressed and you go have a hot fudge sundae, and it's just a hot mess. I don't know.
I want a hot fudge sundae.
Well, if you do 500 crunches a day, you too can.
Yeah, you too can have. Yeah. So an identifier. Well, you brought it up, Wendy. When you do sit-ups and crunches, is it bad? No, it's not bad. It has to be for the right time, right person, right phase of training. You just have to prepare yourself. I want people to be able to flex and extend and rotate your spine, like you said, Wendy. With the crunches, if you watch yourself, and I know you've seen this, Wendy, when somebody does a sit-up or they do a crunch, when it is that time to start implementing that into your program, what you will see when how you can identify that someone is not ready for it is when they do that sit-up and their belly, their midsection pooches out, right? So as they do the crunch, even if they have a six-pack, you'll see their abs pop up away from their spine. And that just shows that they're lacking good intrinsic stabilization. So they're using a lot of the bigger superficial muscles. However, they're missing the ability to control the deeper muscles that you mentioned, Wendy, that are just lining up from vertebrae to vertebrae. So until there's good, deep activation of those deeper muscles, it's going to be harder to use the abdominal region as a whole. And until you do that, you're just going to keep putting more and more and more pressure on those discs between the vertebrae. And that's the issue. We love crunches. We love sit-ups. Well, I don't love sit-ups, but we want you to do it. But we have to first learn how to activate and control the right muscles before we get there. And you can see it and you can identify it when someone does a sit-up and their midsection just bulges out, just pushes outward. So once you start to learn that, then you can start to progress onto that version of a ab exercise.
Well, and I am a huge advocate about the core. I talk about it. I go into detail about it. I present on it all over the world because it is something that I'm super passionate about because of that spinal alignment. So remember, when we're talking about the core, if we remove our head basically and our arms and legs, everything else that's remaining is your core. It's not just the abdominal region. And I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking, I need to work on my core, which means I just want to do a bunch of abs. And so we need to think the cervical spine, the midsection of the spine, so your thoracic spine, and the lower back, which is also your lumbar spine, all of that is your core. And so to your point, Ken, it's interesting because as I present, I will tell people, how many of you guys feel like you're strong enough and you do, a sit up or you do a crunch, and I'll have someone raise their hand and say, well, I was told back in the day that doing a full sit up is actually harmful for you. Remember, a sit-up is an activity of daily living. When you flex your spine forward, that is something that you want to have good control over. And like you said, that spinal stability. And so we want to work someone up to a full sit-up. And we want to be able to work through full available ranges of motion, not just these little crunches that we're doing where we're barely even moving and contracting to its full potential. So with that being said, if you want to do sit-ups and you're struggling doing sit-ups, or if you feel like you need to have a stronger midsection, Start with some of the exercises first, such as a bird dog, which is where you're on all fours and you lift an opposite arm, opposite leg. Do it nice and slow, control, make sure you've got good alignment throughout the spinal region. Make sure your abs are drawn in, which means you're not sucking in, but you're just bringing your belly button towards your spine. Same thing with planks and side planks, exercises that are going to focus on the midsection without that movement first. And then that's how you're going to get that good core stability on the inside. So when you add the movement, which is more of the strength component, your body is able to withstand that. And that will help somebody, especially if they have low back pain, get out of pain, because you're realigning that lumbar spine that has been compressed for so long by working on those little muscles that protect the vertebrae, but then also hopefully working on the glutes to take some of that pressure off of the lower back.
Yep. And I'll just leave it at that, Wendy. That's well said. As far, I mean, the alternatives are there. We just, it's the right time and the right place for these exercises. I think once we get past the really focused abdominal exercises, the next thing we want to talk about is deadlifting. Wendy, do you have your clients deadlift? Any version of a deadlift?
Absolutely. Deadlifts, it's a hinge, guys. That's a fundamental movement pattern of life.
Yeah.
So absolutely do. But
here it is.
With that being said, I just said too, glutes are usually super weak on most people when they walk through my door, even my professional athletes, because they're sitting, they're using their hip flexors a lot. They're super tight in the front side and they're weaker in the back side. So with that being said, I work them up to a deadlift, or I will focus on maybe a single leg Romanian deadlift. So we teach them to be in neutral position of the spine, and they learn to hinge. And Ken, I think that hinge part is what's missing, because we see a lot of people with super heavy weight, because that's what you do in the gym. You lift heavy to look good, and everybody wants a strong butt. Everyone wants amazing hamstrings. Those are the prime movers and target. However, if there is spinal flexion, again, think about what we're talking about with the crunch. If you have that going on during a deadlift, your poor lower back is not going to be a fan when you're all done with that.
No. And it's, I don't say it's sad, but it is just the state of the situation where we have computer or screen-based occupations where you are sitting, or it's just entertainment. You want to watch a movie. You're sitting a lot, and you get that, and I know I've said this before, that gluteal amnesia, because you're sitting on your butt and your hips, they don't get as much work or use or activation as they need to stay alive and awake and active and ready to go, so that when it is time to call upon them, like through an exercise like a deadlift, you forget, and your body's just one big compensation. So learning, and this is if you're a personal trainer listening to us, teaching a proper hip hinge, whether it's a standing hinge, a floor bridge, all those exercises you mentioned, Wendy, master those, master cueing those, master instructing those, and your clients will be 10 times better when it comes to everything else that you're going to do with the lower body. So when it comes to performing a deadlift, doing the requisite movements and the coaching to get somebody to do a proper deadlift is something that you need to do. It's a necessity, because if we're really trying to instill strength and we're really trying to instill good structural integrity through a coordinated pattern like a deadlift, because your center of gravity is shifting, like you said, Wendy, we're doing a fundamental movement pattern that is a part of activities of daily living. We hinge all the time. If you're washing dishes, like I gotta watch it. You're leaning over a counter. We have, or if you're having to pick something out of your trunk of your car, you're hinging. When we don't do that right, those basic things that we need to do every day in life become that much more challenging and more stressful on the lower back.
Well, and it's interesting because on the NASM Performance channel, we had somebody ask, how do you cue a deadlift? How do you cue a hinge? There are so many different variations, and everyone is going to be different. But one of the easiest ways that I visually try to have my clients understand that is imagine that your hands are full and they're down to your side. And I want you to shut the car door with your back end. You know, like you've got things in your hand and the door's open. Instead of using your foot, you kind of kick your butt back. You're not going to flex your spine when you do it. Most of the time people just kind of do this little kickback thing with their glute. And I'm like, okay, stop right at that very end and then slowly lower just the front half of you. And then they start to get it. So you're going to have to find the cues that work for you. But I think even if you're not if you don't have a personal trainer, watch yourself in the mirror a few times to ensure, like from the side, just to ensure that you've got good positioning. So from the side view, your ears, shoulders, and hips should stay kind of nice and straight. And then when you're at that hip hinge, or when you bend, you want to ensure too, almost like you're making kind of like a, I don't know, I don't want to say a 90 degrees because it's not just a 90 degrees, but whatever somebody can control. I think that's an easy way to cue.
That is an easy way to cue. I understood it. So deadlifting is a great exercise, and just got to work your way up to it. And then once you get there and you can control the spine, that's when you want to load the weight. But as we've said many times before, especially on the programs that we've talked about when it comes to progressing overload and challenging the body, you do want to load the bar when it comes to doing the deadlift, because again, we use a lot of muscles, and it's a very coordinated exercise that should be a part, maybe not every day, but at some point in the week, doing some kind of deadlifting version. So on this episode of Random Fit with both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, we're talking about the lowdown on the low back, just because a lot of people think they're doing the best thing they can for their back, but sometimes it's just incomplete or just not right at all. So Wendy, what do you think about just too much spinal flexion? Just people are just flexing and just doing too much of one thing all the time.
I don't like it. That's what I think about it. Yeah. I mean, guys, the thing is we are in that flex position for so many hours of the day. If you are driving, if you are on the computer, if you have kids, if you are doing anything where you're just in that forward position, or if you do things with weights, it tends to make you kind of hunch over into that spinal flexion position. And then we go and we do things where, oh, well, look, I can bend over and touch my toes. I'm stretching my hamstrings. I'm doing inchworms, but I don't really go all the way out. I just kind of walk out and come back, and I stay in that hanging position. I'm not saying that's bad, but then you need to ask yourself on the programming side, what are you doing to extend your back? Now, if there's a bunch of compression and you know that you're working on that, I would tell you don't go into extension, don't arch. But there's something into going into a small extension where you lean back, and then going into excess, like more of a hyper extension where you're actually causing more harm than good to your lumbar spine. So there are certain ranges that you want to maintain. But if you think about this, if you're sitting in traffic, I live in Atlanta, that's a lot. So if you're sitting in traffic and then you sit at work all day, and then you go to the gym and you ride the bike, and then all of a sudden you're sitting down doing different body parts, and then you go into a bunch of crunches, and then you're going to stretch, and you're just bent over stretching the back side of you that's actually weak and not overactive or tight, you didn't do yourself any good, and your lower back is going to take the hit, because we need to actually work on that spinal alignment and hip alignment. So if you notice that everything you're doing is really focusing more on the front side, then take a stop, like honest look at your program, and then maybe the next day do everything working on the back side. And so, really try to be honest with yourself in programming, not saying take everything you love away, but you really want to focus on increasing hamstring strength, glute strength, mid to low back strength, and mid to low trap strength for sure.
And I'll give you an example of a client that I have right now. And she loves getting on her bike. She's watching the video. She's following the instruction. It's hyped, great music, gets her going, but she's flexed. She's holding on to those handlebars, and she's pedaling away for 30, 45 minutes, however long her workout is. And then she wants to do abdominals, right? She wants to do her sit-ups and she wants to do all her core work. So she goes from this flex position, doing her bike, doing her cycling, just jamming to the instructor, very hype instructor. And then as soon as the workout's done, she gets on the floor and guess what she's doing? She's doing straight leg raises, crunches, figure 4 crunches, trunk twists, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But then she goes into now flexing. So you add that onto her corporate job. So she starts her day. She's trying to do good things for her body, get her cardio going and get her core work. Great stuff on paper. But then she sits down and she's behind the computer and she's looking at her ergonomics because she's shown me a picture. She's taken a picture and sent it to me of her work site or her workplace where she's going to be for another 8-9 hours out of that day. So she goes from flex exercise, intentional flexing, hunched over the bike, and then flexed in front of her computer. So there's more to counter than just the sitting. But if you're trying to do good things for your body and it just puts you into more of a chronic position, then like you said, Wendy, there has to be time and dedication to let's work on the other side. Let's do the opposite of what you do all the time. Even though your intentions are good, we just have to take a bird's eye view or just sit back, get a panoramic view of what your body does all day long. And being in this overemphasized lumbar flexed position, even though your intentions are good, we just have to take that into consideration with what you're doing with other parts of your day.
Yes. Well, why don't we talk about those unsupported spinal twisting motions? You all have listened to me for many years, hopefully, whether it's in a workshop, you've seen it on videos on NASM. We've done this on the Master Instructor Roundtable. I've talked about it on Instagram Live. I'm bringing it up again because we've done this on Random Fit. You have to be careful when you want to do the spinal twist. And then I think it comes back to, again, you want to look a certain way and you feel like if you take a heavy medicine ball and you start twisting while your butt is on the ground and your feet are up, this is going to be the best thing for your obliques in a hip flex position and being on the ground, meaning your hips are on the ground. Not saying that there's not a time and place for it personally, but it goes back to exactly what we talked about when we did the crunches, is you want to have good support from those little muscles that protect the spine before now you're starting to add a loaded twisting. And if you don't have good stability between it, then that's when we start to have some maybe imbalances between those muscles in the discs, and people get compressed discs, they get some other issues, when all in all, you just wanted to work your obliques. You just wanted to get the love handles to go away.
Yeah.
It's not just that, y'all.
I need to do more.
The compression, I mean, I also wanted to say this as well. The lumbar spine, which is your lower back, that's where most of the discomfort comes from, needs to be stable. It should not be mobile. So if you have a lot of twisting going around and you're putting a lot of stress and mobility in that area, that's not ideal for those little muscles or that part of the back. Your mobility and movement should be through the mid-back and your thoracic spine. So if you're doing things where you're really emphasizing rotational movements of the thoracic spine, I'm going to be 100% on board with your choices. But just think, where's the movement coming from and how safe is it, especially if someone comes to you with discomfort in the lower back? It's not as ideal. Like, it's just not an ideal place to start personally.
Yeah. But those exercises we brought up, bird dogs, planks, doing those requisite exercises, Copenhagen, side planks, give the spine something else to look at, give the spine something else to react to when it comes to a lot of the stuff that we've already brought up. They're more forward bias, so everything's going to be in front of us. So if we're doing a plank, my forearms are in front of me. If I'm doing a bird dog, although the resistance is going to be a little bit more rotational, you're still, my hand and my knee are going to be out in front of me. So if you start to give the spine something else to react to from a direction of resistance vantage point, that's one way you can work into moving into other planes. And when we talk about planes of motion, we're talking about sagittal, frontal, transverse. So when you brought up, Wendy, multiplanar movements, we're talking about being able to move efficiently forward, laterally, left to right, and then rotationally in that transverse plane. And everything requires a little bit of a buildup, especially when you consider that you're somebody who may not have exercised in a while, or trying to exercise at a higher level than what you're used to. You have to grade how you progress from one to the other, and to go straight from nothing or very little to now putting all that stress, turning those shoulders right and left over your hips, can be a little bit more than what the spine is able to do. But if you take that consideration, the same ones we talked about with the sit-ups and the crunches towards the rotational spinal movements, then you're going to be in a better position than if you just went straight into it.
Yes. That kind of brings us, I think, not really, but I'm going to just say it kind of brings us into the next one. But I think what I've noticed with a lot of my clients, doesn't matter what level of client they are, meaning someone that has never worked out before or somebody that is an elite athlete, they like to do high impact activities, HIIT workouts,
Yeah.
so the high impact training, running, doing things where there's a lot of impact from their foot to the ground, like the striking and those types of movements. Guys, if you're not very stable and strong within your spine, and you don't have the right muscles firing at the right time, and you decide that you're just going to get up and start hit the ground running, literally, that jarring, if you're not landing in the right place and you don't have the absorption of those discs supporting the vertebrae, can actually then start to cause more and more issues and compression to areas that you definitely don't want those muscles to be tight in and put that compression on. So take a step back. It's not about the high impact to start. If you want to go there and it's fun, and I mean, I love it because I like to feel like I just, went to a class, or I had a workout and I just got crushed. I like that feeling. I'm weird, but I like it. And so I know that I actually put a lot into it. But I also know when to not do something. If someone is asking me to do it and they want you to do something, and I know that it's not in my best interest, then I just step back and try to do something that's not as extreme at that moment. And that's okay. So if you're going to go and take some of these classes and you're going to be working with someone, it's okay to say, listen, I've had some low back discomfort. There's going to be certain things that I may not do. No disrespect to you, but just I'll see if I can do something else to keep moving. That one particular instructor is going to be very appreciative because you went ahead and took the forward. You gave them the information ahead of time, so they don't think that you're slacking or not doing something. I think that's super, super important. But also too, you need to build up to certain activities, especially running and things that are going to jar the spine.
Right. And to take some of those examples that you brought up, Wendy, when you bring up high intensity interval training or HIIT training, where you come into any workout session, or you're in one of those boxed boutique studios where they are doing box jumps or depth jumps, it's not just about the impact. Impact's a very important part and a big influence on how much stress is coming through the hips into the low back. But where having a strong midsection, having good core stability plays a big role, especially when it comes to jumping, hopping, anything high impactful like that, is when you do land, everything flexes, everything has to decelerate. So you're going to flex through the ankles, knees, and the hips. Now, where the spinal strength and stability come into play is that you have to be able to maintain pretty decent upper body posture and positioning. So we don't want you to jump off of a box. Let's say it's just a 12-inch box. You jump down, you land, and then everything comes collapsing down by way of the torso. So if you don't have the requisite core strength and stability to keep you upright, when you come down, what comes down must come up in this case. So what's going to pick you up? Well, what's going to help you get back into that upright position? Well, it's everything from your hips on up. So when the midsection isn't strong or stable enough, you're going to collapse farther down than what you would if you had good core stability. But then those muscles have to also pick you back up, but they have to help you extend back into that upright position. So there's the impact, but there's also the consequences of not having good core stability, which is what we would call, from the National Academy of Sports Medicine side of things, is an excessive forward lean. So if you lean forward too far, that means the low back has to do much more to get you back into that upright position. So there's two sides of that coin when it comes to impact or when it comes to landing, if you don't have good landing mechanics.
100%. And then I think it's important, and it kind of blends into one of the next things that I think is extremely important. If somebody comes to you and they say that they have low back pain, I ask them, what kind of rolling do you do? Or what kind of warm up do you do? Do you roll anything? Do you stretch certain muscles? And oftentimes they're like, yeah, I stretch the front of my hips. They may have never used a foam roller. And that's one thing that I then will teach them how to do, and roll certain areas based on what I see in their assessments. However, if somebody is super hip flexed, meaning that if you look at them from the side, they kind of have this low back arch. That's what I'm talking about when I say on a visual side, you can see if someone's kind of being compressed in the lower back. That just means that the hips are shifted a little bit forward, and those hip flexors are in an overactive tight position, pulling those hips forward. And so when that happens, the glutes are in a lengthened position, meaning they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing to help maintain that neutral position and decreasing that spinal compression. So I say perfect. And this is one thing that if I want to challenge you guys to do, if you're not already doing this, when you ask someone to show you how to do a hip flex stretch, I have them show me first, what is it that you're doing? And some people may grab their foot and bring it back like a quad stretch, and then they shift their hips forward. Okay, that's fine. But are they arching their lower back to grab their back foot so they're actually not stretching the psoas, which we talked about? Or do they get on their knee and they lean forward into a lunge position, and they're like, look how far I can go. And they're all excited about it. Again, look at the lower back. It's in a compressed position. So what we want to do is really emphasize lengthening that hip flexor, especially the psoas, by getting into that 90-90, meaning that the back knee is down and the forward knee is bent in front of you. You're making pretty nice 90-degree angles on both sides. Then you squeeze in your tummy a little bit. Again, not holding your breath, and you're not like sucking in for dear life. You're just bringing your belly button back. And then you tilt your hips underneath. So you try to take your glutes and pull them underneath you as far as you can. And then you squeeze the butt cheek that is like on the ground. And so if you do that, because you went into that posterior tilt, remember you've got an anterior, that's where you have the arch. You're trying to flatten your back almost and then squeeze that butt cheek. If you do that, you're going to feel a really, really good stretch. And then you hold that for 20 to 30 seconds. If you can go a little bit further, it's not leaning too far forward. You only have about 10 degrees left of hip extension. So you might shift forward a little bit, but if you can go to the extreme still, you're really not going into a good posterior tilt, or you're starting then to cause more compression to that lower back, and it won't be as beneficial. So I challenge everyone to open up those hip flexors and really focus on strengthening the glutes, and that will help with that low back discomfort in so many different ways.
100%, Wendy.
There's my rant, right?
Yeah, well, and I just had this conversation yesterday with a client, in that if you're going to sit down behind the computer if you're going to get a drink of water, you're going to go out for lunch, you're going to go around the block, take a little walk to get some fresh air, take a knee, do that tilt, or even standing, open up the hips, tuck your tail back, or bring that hip to rotate backwards, And the example I like to give to that, Wendy, is like if your dog messes up the carpet, they know they did something bad and they have their tail tucked between their legs. That's what I want my clients to do, to open up the front of the hip. So get that posterior tilt, get that tail tuck under, and that's going to help open up. And I think once we get mobility and flexibility addressed, that helps everything else happen. I don't say faster, but better. Then you can use your glutes better. Then you can activate and use those deep core exercises better. Everything's better when you have mobility. And that's something that we talk about all the time is, you need to be able to move joints through proper range of motion first before we start to learn how to stabilize and strengthen. So that part, when it comes to getting the hip flexors to open up, if that's actually what an assessment has shown, then definitely do it. But you can also go off the field, and that's a big part of it. So Wendy, I think we talked about a lot of great stuff here when it comes to the low down on the low back. So just to kind of summarize it all, and looking at, can your hips move? Do you have the flexibility? Do you have the range of motion necessary to open things up? Have you progressed from stability into those traditional strength exercises like sit-ups and crunches? And then what have we done to integrate all of that into an exercise like a deadlift? And deadlift it's not the only exercise, it's just a very good example of how to use your hips, especially in that hinge pattern. So Wendy, thanks for your insight on all of this.
You as well. This was fun.
This was I love sharing stories about clients, and it's like they have the best intentions, but I guess that's why we do what we do, right?
That's why we get paid to do what we do.
More importantly.
Yes.
All right. So for those of you listening to us here on Random Fit with both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, thank you for listening to us on this episode on the low down on the low back. So if you like what you heard today, like, follow, subscribe, actually share, let those that can benefit from this information know the great information that we just shared with you. And then just sharing is caring is what I like to say. Download, subscribe, comment, let us know what you want us to talk about, and we will get that to you on one of our future episodes of Random Fit. So until next time, everybody, take care and be well.